You're watching Central Illinois on the Record.
Welcome back. We are joined now by Bridget Shanahan with the IEA, and Neil Calderon. You are a teacher, high school teacher in Springfield. Of course, we are continuing the conversation about Janus versus AFSCME. And Bridget, we were talking earlier in the week, not necessarily a huge surprise that the Supreme Court handed down the decision that it did, but disappointing nonetheless.
Sure. I mean, we've been preparing for this for years now. We knew this was coming. We've seen the attacks coming from both Governor Bruce Rauner and the conservative right for a long time, including the Illinois Policy Institute. So this is something that we are prepared for.
You're watching Central Illinois on the Record.
All right, welcome back. We are continuing the conversation about the Janus versus AFSCME decision with the IEA, a couple of representatives, a teacher from Springfield, Neil Calderon, and Bridget Shanahan, Media Relations Director with the IEA. And Bridget, as we were talking earlier in the week, booking this segment, and not unexpected decision, but in your words, disappointing nonetheless.
Yes, certainly a disappointing decision. I mean, we've known this has been coming for years. It's something that we've been preparing for. Our members have been preparing for, so it's something that we're ready for. And even though it's an attack that is meant to destroy us, but that's not going to happen. We're going to fight back. We're all ready for this. But yeah, it's certainly a setback. And we know that the conservative right and Governor Rauner and the Illinois Policy Institute are trying to destroy us with this. And of course, that's a bit unsettling.
Neil, how does this impact you in your position as a teacher? I know that one of our affiliate stations, you spoke with WCIA earlier this week about this, and you talked about fighting back as well, just like Bridget did. How do you fight back in a situation like this?
For us, fighting back is making sure to connect with all of our members, having conversations with our friends in the building, talking to the teachers I work with every day, my friends that I've been working with for years and years, and talking about the value of being a part of a union. As an individual, we can't nearly have the voice that we do and the impact that we do like we do in a group. And when you think of teaching, you think of being in a classroom. So we're used to being individuals, but we are always part of a bigger scene, whether it's a school or a school district. We are part of that as well too. So the concept of being individual and being a group is pretty familiar with us, and we're going to redouble our efforts to make sure that everybody realizes the value of being a part of the group that is the IEA, or for other teachers the IFT, and making sure that we stress how important it is that we do stay together, because our voice is stronger. We're able to advocate for not just ourselves but our students and our families much better, because when we talk about issues like school safety, we're talking about issues that, yeah, that's our workplace, but that's where we send our children. That's where I send my daughter, who's going into first grade next year. And so when we talk about those issues as a collective bargaining unit, we're talking about those for not just ourselves but our community too.
Now, Mark Janus, obviously, in framing this argument, did so as an issue of free speech, and he said that it was violating his First Amendment rights to have to pay these dues. But after the decision was made, it was very much framed as a political argument, and you kind of alluded to that, I think, Bridget. And you kind of heard from President Trump and certainly J.B. Pritzker, and obviously, for obvious reasons, he's using that as on the campaign trail. But you know, do you see this as more of a First Amendment issue, or now more of a political tool?
I mean, this is a political tool, plain and simple. I mean, this is an attack on public education. It's not just an attack on public union members. It's an attack on public schools as we know it. I mean, 7 out of 10 teachers nationwide are in unions, and when you try to weaken their collective voice, like as Neil mentioned, that they use to advocate for their students, their schools, and their communities, you're messing with the public school system and that public education that we want to make sure every student in Illinois has access to. So I would argue that this is a move to privatize education. We've seen that from the conservative right. And we've seen that from Governor Rauner with the passage of vouchers this past legislative session. So that's something that we are going to fight against and make sure that they fail.
Now, Neil, when that argument is made that that this weakens the ability for the union to argue on behalf of teachers collectively because maybe it's as much revenue isn't collected to to do that. Explain to our viewing audience why that is so. Why is it so important for that money to be collected? To those people who think that simply the union is an arm of the Democratic Party and that's what the money is
sure,
used
and
for.
I think the important thing to remember is that having a collective voice, being able to have a seat at the table, it requires a lot of time and a lot of expense, because the collective bargaining units that each local has are comprised of members. So these are teachers that have to take time out of their classroom, and in order to have that time out of the classroom, to have these negotiation meetings, to do the research, to be able to do the planning, to actually represent their members, they have to have substitutes, and the union and it's through union dues that we're able to pay for those substitutes to cover those classrooms so that they can have the time to do it. Because unfortunately, as a teacher, our days are already stretched pretty thin in terms of lesson planning and going and working with extracurriculars and being involved with everything like that. The ability to have that time to go out and have that voice is paid through union dues, and the vast majority of what union dues go towards are those kind of functions of representing employees, of having the ability to have that voice at the collective bargaining table. The political aspect of it, and where I find the argument from the other side pretty disingenuous about this being about free speech, is that this was completely designed to strike at the funding resources of unions, so that they can't be able to provide those basic functions. Because ultimately, you're going to see now this is the end of the beginning. This isn't going to be a point where Bruce Rauner and his cronies are going to be popping champagne and saying, "Well, we've accomplished everything we wanted to." They're going to have a concerted effort to try to drive a wedge between members and their unions. And that's all in an effort to try to make sure that in the meantime, unions are legally required to represent everybody and to provide full services, but not be compensated for them, not be funded for them. And so that's where the issue lies. If this were about free speech, Bruce Rauner would have championed, oh, well, then unions should only represent their members, but he didn't do that. He wanted to make sure that this case formed that wedge that could be used to defund unions and at the same time cause them to be less effective because they just don't have the resources to represent their members.
And I think, sorry to interrupt you, Paul, I think it's important to note too that the fair share fees that the Supreme Court ruled against are separate from the extra fees that our members pay. And that's the money that is used for lobbying efforts and for political functions. So it is different. So he wasn't talking about the extra money that you pay towards lobbying if you're a full-fledged member like Neil is. So this is a different story altogether.
Wouldn't a separate argument be potentially in this state that legislation was passed by the General Assembly to automatically raise teacher salaries? So wouldn't that take away some of the argument for unions, at least in that part of negotiations, that, hey, the General Assembly has the power to raise teacher salaries on a now year-by-year basis?
Sure, and I think if you look at why the General Assembly acted that way, it's because teachers have a voice, because we, through our union, advocated for improving our compensation. And we do it not just with compensation, but we do it with school safety. We do it with a whole host of issues that impact our communities. And so without that voice, taking that away, I, as an individual, could write my member of the General Assembly, and I could speak out individually. I can go and lobby myself, but I'm just one person. And as a civics teacher, I always encourage my students to get involved and to voice their concern. But there's a reason why in the First Amendment we have the right to assemble. It's because as a group of people with like-minded concerns, you can make a bigger difference. And that's why I've been a proud union member since the start of my career. In fact, when I was a student teacher, I signed up to be a student member of the IEA because I was that excited to be in the union.
So, Bridget, what is next then? I know because we've mentioned a couple times, continuing to fight. So what is the next move for the IEA in this situation?
Well, we're hearing from our members, like Neil and others, who are angry and upset about this decision and upset about this ruling. And so we're going to fight back. I mean, we're not going to forget where this case came from. We know that Governor Bruce Rauner started this case initially, and there's a big election coming up in November. We are the largest union in Illinois. We're the largest teachers union in Illinois. We have 135,000 member Army who is not going to forget about this case come November.
And Neil, I'm going to let you have the last word. What do you tell your fellow teachers who are happy about this decision handed down by the Supreme Court?
I think I caution them in terms of this, because it can be really tempting, and I'm sure we'll see a barrage of propaganda from the other side talking about, well, if you opt out now, you can gain your union dues back. And I personally pay about $700 a year in union dues, and I could easily think of a lot of things I'd love to spend $700 on. But the thing is, when you think about the value that you get from that, the fact that I get compensated based on my experience and based on the level of education that I've attained. I wouldn't have that if I wasn't a part of a union. And the fact that I have an advocate whenever there's an issue in the building that I think needs to be addressed, where I don't think the students are being treated properly or we don't have the proper resources, I know I've got an organization that's got my back in that case. And so it's a matter of, sure, on the front end, it's not an immediate, it's not immediate gratification. It's not like I get a list of, oh, and I get this week and this. But it's the fact that that's a small price to pay. It's an extreme value to be able to be a part of that organization that provides so much and has provided so much for me. I'm about midway through my career at 16 years. It has provided an enormous amount of benefit for me, and I would encourage teachers to look beyond the slick advertising that's going to come their way, and say, what am I actually getting for the dues, and what have I gotten for the dues, and what will I get in the future? Because this is not just about during career, but there's pension rights that our union stands up for, and frankly, we should be an example for the larger community. It shouldn't be that just teachers or public employees or healthcare workers or trades members or union members. We should be advocating that every employee should have a voice in their workplace, because workplaces are better when it's a collaborative effort between employer and employee.
Neil Calderon is a high school teacher in Springfield. Bridget Shanahan is the Media Relations Director with the Illinois Education Association. Thank you both for being here.
Thanks for having us.